He lost everything until she risked everything to save him.
He was once one of the richest men alive, but when he lost everything, he walked straight into the ocean to end his life. But what he didn't expect was that the person who would save him would be a poor black girl society never saw. Tell me in the comments, do you believe every person deserves a second chance? And hit subscribe if this hooked you. She wasn't the kind of girl people remembered when they passed her. She wasn't loud. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't the type whose presence filled a room. Mandy Holan was the kind of woman society walked past like background furniture. Useful, reliable, invisible. Her world was not built of golden halls and glass skyscrapers. Her world was cracked pavements, rusted bus stops, and rainwater that flooded through broken drains every time the sky opened up its anger. Every morning she left her tiny one-room apartment when the city was still half asleep, the streetlights flickering like dying candles. She would tie her hair back with the same worn elastic band she had used for 5 years now, with the same gray button shirt she had ironed so many times the fabric had become thin, and she would whisper to herself, like a private vow no one else ever heard, "Keep going. One more day." The neighborhood she lived in smelled of stale water, forgotten dreams, and regret mixed with cigarette smoke. Walls were stained with rain like old bruises that never healed. People learned early here. Life doesn't care how hard you worked. It only cares how well you survive. Mandy survived by working 2 jobs. Not because she didn't have ambition, but because ambition was a luxury she could not afford. In the morning, she waitressed at a low-budget diner on the grim edge side of the city. She smiled politely at strangers who didn't even look at her face while ordering. She served coffee to men who talked to her chest instead of her eyes. She refilled cups for lonely women who complained about their ex-husbands or their bland marriages, as if Mandy were some unpaid therapist. She never said more than needed. She worked silently, efficiently, invisible. After the diner, she would grab the bus, then walk another 15 minutes to her second job, cleaning abandoned corporate office floors in the city's older business district. Now and then, she would stare at the huge framed photographs of CEOs and executives still hanging on the walls, smiling, confident, powerful, and she wondered what they had that people like her never got a hold in their hands. It wasn't money alone. Money was only a tool. What they possessed, what she didn't, was access, doors, connections, permission to exist in higher rooms. She never questioned the value of her own mind. She knew she could lead if life allowed her. But leadership was a privilege, and Mandy learned early. Society doesn't hand privilege to women like her. She had to earn every crumb. She didn't have dreams anymore. Dreams were too expensive. She only had duty. But her duty didn't make her bitter. It made her resilient. Quiet strength is the most underrated form of power, and Mandy Holan lived it every day. Tonight was another one of those nights. It was 11:19 p.m. Rain hammered the streets like stones from a broken sky. The temperature dropped so sharply her breath was visible. She stood at the old service door of the abandoned corporate cleaning lot, wearing a thin sweater soaked through to her skin, hugging her own arms to stop herself from shivering. Her socks inside her shoes were wet. Her hair clung against her cheeks. The storm felt like it wanted to peel the city apart piece by piece. Most nights the storm would have convinced her to stay inside the office longer, wait it out. But tonight the supervisor had shut the lights and locked the building because they were cutting operational hours again. He didn't apologize. He just said, "Budget cuts don't care about weather. Holan, time is time." So Mandy walked out into the storm quietly. No umbrella, no backup, no one waiting at home to keep the heater on. She didn't complain. Complaints don't warm the skin. Complaints don't dry the clothes. Complaints don't end rain. Reality does not care about feelings. She learned that early. Her shoes splashed through puddles that soaked her up to the ankles with each step. She hugged her bag close to her chest. Inside were 2 things: a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich and a folded paper receipt that represented her entire financial world. It was a late bill, past due. She would figure it out. She always figured it out. The city around her looked like a graveyard of steel and water. Streetlights flickered like bad memories trying to survive. Cars rushed by with no faces behind glass. only shadows. Bridges loomed black against the storm. Thunder rumbled like artillery, fire rolling across a battlefield. This was a world the wealthy never saw. The world beneath their penthouses, beneath their private elevators, beneath their glass towers. This was the belly of the beast called poverty. Yet Mandy's spirit remained soft. Her eyes remained kind. Even though life had carved every harsh lesson into her bones, she still believed, somewhere, that humanity mattered. She still smiled at old ladies struggling to carry grocery bags. She still gave her last dollar to homeless teenagers when she could. She still prayed silently inside her own chest without needing a church or a choir. Her softness wasn't weakness. It was resistance. People hardened by life often become cruel, but Mandy became gentle because she knew how sharp pain felt. She refused to add more of it to others. As she walked toward the waterfront area, the pier zone, she wiped rain from her forehead and exhaled sharply. The wind was so violent it pushed her sideways and forced her to hold a rail as she stepped onto the wooden planks. The dock smelled like salt, soaked wood and iron. Waves shattered against the pillars below, roaring up against the night like wild beasts tearing at cages. Normally, she would never take this shortcut across the pier, but the main road was closed due to lightning frying a transformer pole. So she walked this unstable wooden walkway, placing her steps carefully, her soaked skirt clinging to her knees, her teeth lightly chattering. Her mind drifted. Why is life always like this? Not self. Pity, just silent curiosity. She wondered if God still remembered girls like her, if destiny had ever looked in her direction, if hope had ever thought her name was worth writing. She tightened her sweater around herself and kept moving, step by step, refusing collapse beneath the weight of exhaustion. And that was when it happened. A thunder burst from the sky, a violent, earth-shaking crack, lightning tearing the clouds apart in one ripping strike. And in that exact instant, Mandy Holan froze, because she heard something that did not belong to the storm. A splash, not the rhythm of waves, not the slap of wind. A human splash, the kind that comes from a body entering water with weight. Her heart stopped. She dropped her bag on the wetwood without thinking, the half-eaten sandwich spilling out, the unpaid bill soaking instantly into the rain. She didn't even notice. Her eyes locked on the dark section of the pier's end, barely lit by a dying street lamp. There was movement out there. Someone or something was under the water's surface. And Mandy Holan, the girl the world didn't see, stood in the storm, breath trembling, rain slicing her skin, realizing someone just fell into the ocean. The thunder cracked again, louder, and the splash turned into a struggle, a drowning struggle, violent, desperate. Someone was trying to stay above water. Mandy's pulse spiked. Her soaked fingers tightened into fists, and she took the first step toward the end of the pier, where fate was waiting to collide with her life. Most people believe the fall of powerful men happens slowly, gradually, like seasons shifting. But Steve Smart didn't fall like autumn leaves drifting toward winter. He fell like a skyscraper being detonated from the inside. 1 minute, he was one of the most celebrated minds in global finance. The young black titan who built multinational liquidity networks nobody believed were possible. The man whose signature could tilt billions like pebbles. The next minute, the entire empire he built over 22 relentless years collapsed in a single quarter. And it wasn't a market crash. It was betrayal, not from the outside, from the inside. It began with whispers, a boardroom vote without his presence, a private shareholder dinner he was never invited to, documents he didn't recognize, with his signature photoshopped onto them, a liquidity segment he never approved, but was tied to his ID. And before he could even defend himself, the media had already written their digital epitaphs. Steve Smart, the billionaire who lied. From $40 billion to zero, what happened to the black finance king? Investment legend or investment fraud? Journalists who once begged for interviews now posted headlines dripping with bloodlust. Investors deleted his phone number. Politicians who once bowed to him now pretended they never shook his hand. The world that worshiped him on Monday crucified him on Tuesday. That's how fragile power is. That's how cheap loyalty becomes in the higher floors of capitalism. The board of his own company. Men who built their wealth doing nothing while he worked 18-hour days. Held an emergency vote. They removed him. Like trash. Like he was an inconvenience. They forced him out, signed his exit, froze his access, and turned his life work into a weapon against him. Steve Smart stood in the middle of the executive boardroom that morning, glass walls reflecting the storm outside, but the real storm was inside his chest. He stared at men who once called him friend, men who toasted champagne with him, men who celebrated their own children's birthdays with his money in his private penthouses, men who begged him for advice on how to build generational wealth. And now those same men couldn't even hold eye contact with him. They passed folders around like funeral pamphlets, signatures, legal condemnation, corporate separation. His own legal counsel wouldn't look at him in the eye. His CFO avoided him entirely. No one said they were sorry. No one said this was a mistake. No one tried to defend him, because in the business world, innocence is meaningless if narrative is against you. And Steve Smart had lost a narrative. When the security guards escorted him out of the tower, the cameras flashed like hungry wolves. All they saw was blood in the water. And billionaires are no longer kings once the empire is gone. They become symbols, entertainment, public execution events. By the time Steve got home, every major broadcast platform had already posted. Steve Smart, fortune erased. All his accounts frozen pending investigations. His high-level friends went silent. His lawyers were unavailable. His private number leaked online. Strangers, complete strangers, sent him messages telling him they always suspected he was a fraud. Bloggers he had never met posted psychological analyses of his downfall. Some celebrated his ruin. Some made memes. He ordered food later that evening, and the delivery driver looked at him with a smirk as if saying, "So you're the fallen giant." Steve Smart stood in his penthouse, alone, surrounded by windows showing the skyline he once ruled. The world outside moved on, but his identity shattered. Most people fear being broke. Rich men fear being worthless. He had built his entire sense of existence on being needed, being powerful, being the one people had to call when numbers rose or crashed. Now that no one needed him, who was he? Not a CEO, not a strategist, not a visionary. Just a man, alone, inside a cold penthouse that felt too big for his bones. The human brain is terrified when silence grows inside it. Steve Smart didn't decide to die because of pain. Pain he could survive. Pain he had survived many times. He decided to die because he believed his value had expired. He believed he had become useless. And useless men don't deserve space in the world. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. He wasn't hysterical. He calmly took a black umbrella, left the penthouse, and walked toward the pier. The storm had already begun. Rain slamming down like nature was cleaning the city with violence. People on the street barely looked up. Rainstorms are nothing new in the city. But behind every raindrop, his mind repeated one soft sentence. "You are not needed anymore." He got to the waterfront, shoes heavy with water, suit soaked, tie clinging to his collar like a reminder of his old corporate leash. He stepped onto the wooden pier, wind pushing him sideways. He could hear waves beating at the pillars, black water swirling beneath like an endless mouth waiting to swallow. He took another step, then another. No fear, just certainty. The thunder cracked above him, like heaven ripping in half. Lightning flashed, lighting the water into silver scars. Steve Smart closed his eyes and breathed out. He didn't think about redemption. He didn't think about memories. He didn't crave revenge. He just whispered into the raging darkness, "I'm done." And then he took the final step forward, into the water, into the storm, into death. The ocean swallowed him instantly, the waves exploding upward, the sea dragging him down like a vengeful god. The storm roared, lightning slashed the sky, and his body was yanked deeper beneath the water as his final breath escaped into the abyss. The storm was not meant for walking humans. It was meant for cleansing, for erasing, for reminding the city that nature still owned the night. But Mandy Holan didn't care about the storm. Her sneakers slapped against wet pavement as she hurried home from her cleaning shift, plastic raincoat plastered against her skin. The streets glistened with reflections of dying neon signs, blue and orange streaks dancing on black puddles. Her backpack hung loosely from her shoulder, stuffed with soggy paper towels and an empty food container she had saved from the restaurant's trash to wash and reuse. It was past midnight. Most people in her neighborhood stayed indoors when the rain hit this hard. But Mandy didn't have the luxury to wait for better weather. Her shift ended when the boss said it ended, and the boss never checked the clouds. She turned a corner near the harbor road, the place where the city lights gave up trying to reach the ocean. The pier stretched out like a broken finger into the dark, the wood slick with rain, the waves below roaring like they wanted to swallow the entire coast. Her breath came in clouds. The storm's rhythm pressed into her chest. And then a flash of movement. At first, she thought it was just a reflection of lightning. But no, someone had fallen. Mandy froze. Her eyes squinted through the mist. There, a shape, a figure in a dark suit, swallowed by the waves. Her heart stuttered. Oh my God! Without thinking, she dropped her bag. Her legs moved before her brain caught up. She sprinted down the dock, shoes slamming the soak planks, water splashing upward like glass shards. The wind screamed around her, yanking her hood backward. Her braids whipped against her cheek. She saw the man again, his arm thrashing above the surface once, then disappearing. "Hold on!" she shouted, though her voice vanished into the wind. She reached the edge of the pier and dropped to her knees, wooden boards biting into her skin, rain lashing her face. She scanned the water. There, a faint glimmer of white shirt fabric twisting beneath the waves. Instinct took over. Mandy stretched her arm out, leaning dangerously close to the edge. Come on, come on. The lightning exploded again, and in that flash, she saw his face beneath the surface. Eyes open, empty, defeated. She plunged both arms into the freezing water. Her fingers brushed fabric, then a wrist, cold and heavy. Got you, she gasped. He didn't respond. The current yanked his weight downward. Her shoulders burned as she tightened her grip. Rainwater mixed with salt water as the pier shook beneath the thunder. She braced her foot against a wooden beam, gritted her teeth, and pulled. For a second, she thought she was losing him, his body slipping, the waves dragging harder, but something inside her screamed no. The same inner voice that had told her to keep working when her landlord threatened eviction. The same voice that whispered, "You still matter," when the world ignored her. She locked her arms, screaming into the wind. Not tonight. You're not dying tonight. With a desperate cry, she hauled him upward, his chest breaking the surface, his suit clinging like seaweed. The storm cracked above them, illuminating the moment. The exact instant the uploaded image captured. Mandy, a poor girl in soaked clothes, her skin glistening under the lightning silver, holding the limp hand of a man she didn't know. Her face fierce, his pale ghostly, drowning in silence. She pulled again, knees scraping wood, every tendon screaming. Then with a final heave, he slid onto the pier. Both of them collapsed, gasping, choking, coughing up rain and seawater. The world went quiet for 3 seconds. Just the sound of waves slapping against the dock and Mandy's ragged breathing. The man lay beside her, face to the sky, rain hitting his skin like shattered glass. Mandy coughed, pushing soaked hair from her eyes. Hey! Are you breathing?" He didn't move. She slapped his cheek lightly. "Come on, don't you die on me now." He gasped, a sharp inhale that ripped through the storm silence. His chest jerked, and he rolled to the side, vomiting seawater onto the pier. Mandy fell back, relief trembling through her body. She watched him breathe, watched his fingers twitch, watched the spark of life crawl its way back into his lungs. The thunder rolled again, distant now, like the sky was retreating after its violent outburst. Mandy sat cross-legged beside him, her hands still shaking. "You scared me, man. I thought—" She stopped herself. She looked at him properly for the first time. Even through the soaked suit, she could tell he wasn't some average man. His wristwatch gleamed faintly in the flashes of lightning. custom design, something she'd only ever seen in magazine covers. His shoes, handcrafted, the kind rich men wore once before buying 10 new pairs. Who the hell tries to drown themselves wearing that? He coughed again, weakly this time. Then his head turned slightly, eyes unfocused, voice broken and hoarse. "Why?" he whispered. Mandy leaned closer. "What?" His lips trembled. "Why didn't you let me go?" The question hung in the rain like a ghost. She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He turned his head toward her. Even half, dead, his face carried a haunting sharpness, the kind of face that had known power too long and forgotten softness. "You should have just walked away," he murmured. "You don't even know me." Mandy's brows furrowed. Her voice came out small, trembling, but firm, because pain doesn't make you disposable. He stared at her, truly stared, as though the sentence didn't fit inside the language he was used to hearing. Her hands were trembling from cold. The wind whipped her hair again. She hugged herself and looked away, embarrassed at her own words. But for Steve Smart, it was the first thing that had cut through the noise inside his head in weeks. He sat up slowly, coughing one last time. The ocean stretched behind him, black and endless, the same ocean that almost took him. And beside him sat a poor girl with nothing, no wealth, no advantage, no reason to care. Yet she had chosen to save him. He didn't understand it. The lightning flashed once more, framing them in silver, the broken billionaire and the invisible girl. And in that storm-lit moment, something irreversible shifted. The world hadn't ended. Not yet. The girl who had nothing had just given the man who had lost everything a reason to breathe again. Steve's breath trembled as he looked into Mandy's eyes, the rain streaming down both their faces like tears. And with a hollow, fragile voice, he whispered again, almost in disbelief, "Why didn't you let me go?" The rain refused to stop. It came harder now, sheets of water drumming against the pier like a relentless army. The thunder had softened, but the downpour grew heavier, thick as grief. Mandy struggled to lift the half-conscious man beside her. His clothes were waterlogged. Every inch of his body felt like lead. The pier was slippery, and the wind tried to push them back into the sea, but she tightened her grip on his arm and forced him to stand. "Come on," she muttered, panting. "We can't stay here." Steve Smart stumbled beside her, his breath shallow, soup clinging like wet paper. His eyes remained half open, unfocused, as if he hadn't fully returned from the darkness he'd tried to drown in. Mandy half-dragged, half-guided him toward the nearest structure, an old cargo shack by the edge of the harbor. It had been abandoned for years, left behind by the shipping company that once used the pier for offloading containers. The door creaked as she shoved it open. Inside was darkness, the faint smell of oil and rust, and the hollow echo of dripping rainwater from holes in the roof. She helped him sit against the wall, then slammed the door shut behind them. For a moment, there was only silence, broken only by their labored breathing and the sound of the storm beyond the walls. Mandy took off her soaked jacket. It was a thin, cheap thing, barely enough to keep her warm, but she crouched beside him and wrapped around his shoulders anyway. "Here," she whispered. "You'll freeze." He didn't respond. His head hung low, eyes on the floor. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath sounding like a battle. She pulled back and sat opposite him, hugging her knees to her chest. Her hair clung to her face, drops of rain sliding down her neck. In the dim light seeping through the broken window, she could finally see him clearly. He wasn't just anyone. Even soaked, exhausted, and stripped of authority, she could see it. The posture, the expensive wristwatch that even seawater couldn't dull, the silk tie hanging crookedly, the faint trace of cologne that still clung to his collar. Whoever he wasn't from her world. But right now, he looked like a ghost of himself. After several minutes, he finally spoke. His voice was low, quiet, trembling under the weight of exhaustion. "You should have left me there." Mandy looked up. "What?" He didn't lift his head. "I wasn't meant to be saved." "Don't say that." He laughed bitterly, a hollow, joyless sound that echoed off the metal walls. "You think you did me a favor? You just postponed the inevitable." She frowned, biting her lip. Nobody's life is inevitable. He finally looked at her then, eyes cold, sharp, still carrying fragment of the man he used to be. What do you know about life? Her jaw tightened. Enough to know it doesn't belong to money. The words lingered, quiet but sharp enough to cut through his arrogance. He leaned back against the wall, staring at the cracked ceiling. You think I did this because of money? Mandy didn't answer right away. The rain outside roared harder, but inside, her silence was louder. I don't know who you are, she said finally, but people like you have everything. And when you lose it, you think you've lost your reason to breathe. He glanced at her. And what would you know about that? Her lips trembled. She took a slow breath. Because I've lived my whole life without anything, and I'm still breathing. That made him pause. He studied her face, the exhaustion, the softness, the quiet defiance. There was something in her tone that wasn't anger. It was understanding, the kind that comes only from living close to pain. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "What's your name?" "Mandy," she said. "Mandy Holan." He nodded faintly, as if committing it to memory. "Steve," he muttered. "Steve," she repeated softly. "Okay, Steve. Then tell me, why were you ready to die tonight?" He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Because everything I built turned to ashes. My company, my reputation, my legacy. 22 years of work, gone in a quarter." Mandy frowned. "That's the lot." "It was everything," he said, voice rising. "Every second of my life went into building that empire. I was a name that moved markets. People followed my every word. And then suddenly I became nothing." She tilted her head. "So that's why you wanted to drown? Because you lost power?" He looked away. "You don't understand." "Then make me," she said quietly. "Explain it." He turned back toward her. "I used to be the man people begged to meet. Now those same people pretend I don't exist. Do you know what that feels like? To realize every handshake, every smile, every partnership was just another transaction? To watch the entire world vanish when the money stops." Mandy didn't flinch. She stared straight into his despair and whispered, "Yeah, I do." He blinked. "You do?" She nodded slowly. "Because that's what being poor feels like every day. The world doesn't see you. Nobody calls. Nobody cares. You walk into a room and you're invisible. So yeah, I understand." For the first time since she'd met him, Steve fell silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because her words had stripped away the illusion that his pain was unique. Mandy shifted slightly, wrapping her arms around herself again. "My father used to work for a big company downtown, one of those firms that thought it ran the whole world. He gave them 20 years. Then one morning, he came home with a cardboard box." Steve's breath caught. He didn't interrupt. They said they were cutting costs. He was just another number. "After that, things got bad. He started drinking. We lost the house. Mom left. I picked up work at 16. That's been my life since." Steve swallowed, guilt gnawing through his chest like acid. He didn't know why, but something about her story twisted inside him. "What company?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, her eyes meeting his through the darkness. "Smart Global Holdings." His world stopped. That name, his name. Steve's throat closed. The storm outside seemed to fade for a moment, replaced by the sharp ring of realization echoing through his mind. Smart Global Holdings, his old empire. The same company whose cost efficiency policies had fired thousands during their rise. He stared at her, horror creeping up his spine. "Your father worked for me?" She nodded. "Worked for your company. You didn't fire him yourself, but someone like you decided people like him were expendable." Steve's face drained the color. He couldn't find words. His fingers trembled as he looked at her, at the girl who had saved him, at the living consequence of the empire he had once glorified. She was a human version of every name on those layoff lists, every life he'd brushed aside while chasing success, and she had pulled him from death. The silence in the shack turned heavier. Mandy looked down, picking at her damp sleeve. "I don't hate you," she said softly. "I just hate what this world does to people." Steve's voice broke. "I didn't know." You never asked, she whispered. He stared at the floor, eyes burning. The rain beat the walls like an accusation. Everything he believed about his empire, his achievements, his power, turned hollow. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but there was nothing left to defend. The truth was simple. His success had built the very pain that shaped her life. Mandy looked up then, her gaze steady despite the exhaustion. Tell me something, Steve. He looked at her through blurred vision. Is money your only identity? Her question cut deeper than any headline ever had. The thunder outside rumbled again, but this time it sounded like an answer waiting for him to find. Not from the world, but from himself. Steve sat frozen in the dark, drenched, trembling, and for the first time in years, he didn't know who he was without his wealth. Her words echoed in the hollow shack. Is money your only identity? The rain had softened into a steady drizzle by the time Mandy helped Steve stand. His legs were weak, trembling beneath him, his soaked suit weighing him down like an anchor. The ocean still roared behind them, but the rage and the wind had calmed, as if the storm itself had exhaled, exhausted. Mandy looped his arm around her shoulders, leaning her small frame under his full weight. Come on, she murmured. You can't stay out here. Steve didn't resist this time. He followed her steps like a man in a trance, as though his body knew survival mattered, even if his mind wasn't convinced. They made their way through narrow, dimly lit alleys where streetlights flickered like dying stars. The city's rich never came near this district, but the city's poor had nowhere else to exist. Graffiti stained the brick walls. Windows were boarded. Metal gates rattled in the wind like loose bones. Mandy walked with familiarity, not fear. She lived here. They reached a small, aging apartment complex with peeling paint and rusted balconies. Mandy pushed open the front door. It was always unlocked. Nobody here stole from one another. What was there to steal? The stairwell smelled of wet carpet and dust. Mandy steadied Steve as they climbed. At the second-floor landing, she hesitated. Her father's door was at the end of the hall. She looked at Steve, unsure. But what else could she do? He needed warmth. He needed dry clothes. He needed a place to exist until morning. Just don't say much, she whispered to him. My father isn't the kindest man when he's hurting. She didn't say, and he's always hurting. Mandy opened the door. The interior was dim, one lamp in the corner casting a low yellow glow. A man sat slumped in an armchair, his gray hair wild, his unshaven jaw shadowed, a bottle of whiskey half, finished in his hand. His father was once a man with posture, confidence, pride. Now he looked like a collapsed version of himself, a human ruin. He didn't notice them at first. His eyes were fixed on the static, filled TV screen, where a late night news anchor spoke about the collapse of the legendary Smart Global Holdings and the shocking destruction of Steve Smart's empire. Steve froze behind Mandy. He heard his own name. The headline flashed on the screen. The rise and fall of a billionaire king. Mandy's father let out a short, bitter laugh before taking a swig from a bottle. Serves him right, he muttered. Mandy swallowed. Then she spoke cautiously. Dad, we need help. Her father looked up, irritated, ready to snap at her for disturbing him. Then he saw Steve. His entire body stiffened. The bottle slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. For a full 5 seconds, nobody breathed. Mandy's father stood up slowly, eyes narrowing, disbelief twisting into rage. You, he sputtered. It's you. Steve stepped back, leaning slightly against the doorframe for support. Yes, he whispered. It's me. The old man's face contorted. Not just anger, pain, decades of it. You! The father shouted again, voice cracking raw. The man who ruined thousands of families in the name of corporate efficiency. The man whose company sent me home with nothing but a box and a handshake. Mandy stepped between them, hands raised. Dad, stop. And oh, he roared, you don't get to defend him. His eyes blazed, bloodshot, wild, staring daggers at Steve. This man destroyed our lives. You think I forgot? You think I don't remember the day I came home, and you asked me if I got a promotion? You think I forgot the look on your mother's face when she realized I wasn't worth anything to the world anymore? Steve's knees weakened again, this time not from exhaustion, but guilt, shame, recognition. He had been the architect of the world this man suffered under. I didn't know, Steve whispered. The father laughed, humorless. Of course you didn't. Men like you never do. You just push papers and call it optimization. You call ruining families strategy. You call human beings cost volume. You think we're statistics. Steve's voice cracked. I'm sorry. The room froze. Those words were alien here. They didn't belong to men like Steve Smart. Mandy's father blinked, thrown slightly off balance by the sincerity. You're sorry, he repeated, not mocking, just stunned. Funny, because sorry doesn't rebuild a life. Steve lowered his head. I know. Mandy looked between them, heart pounding. She had not expected this moment. Not this soon. Her father gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white. His breathing slowed, but his eyes remained sharp. You came here for forgiveness? He spat. No, Steve said quietly. I came here because she saved my life. Mandy's father scoffed. She should have let the ocean finish the job. That's enough. Mandy snapped, louder than she'd ever spoken in this house. He's a human being, not a paycheck. Her father stared at her, stunned, then turned his glare back to Steve. You want truth, he growled. Then here it is. He leaned forward, eyes cold, voice low. Not a drunk ramble, but a man who had held this knowledge like poison for years. You didn't lose your empire because of a bad quarter, he said. Steve's eyes widened. You were sabotaged, Mandy's father continued. Someone inside your own inner circle planned it. Steve's blood ran cold. How do you know that? He whispered. Mandy's father leaned even closer. Because I saw the documents at the time I was fired. Your collapse was already in motion long before the public saw it. Someone planted the seeds years ago. Quietly, strategically. Steve's breath vanished. His pulse hammered in his ears. Someone he trusted, someone close enough to know his internal infrastructure, had been setting him up long before the downfall. Who? Steve whispered, voice trembling like the storm outside. Mandy's father narrowed his eyes. That, he said slowly, is something only one person knows. And she's living right here in this district. Steve's jaw clenched. Who is she? Mandy's father looked him dead in the eyes. I'll tell you, he whispered, but only when you can handle the truth. Steve's heart slammed against his ribs. This wasn't over. Someone he trusted, had engineered his destruction. He stared at Mandy's father, every nerve in his body on fire, realizing the nightmare he thought was fate, was conspiracy. And someone out there still wanted him destroyed. The words from Mandy's father hung in the air like smoke, thick, invisible, but choking. Someone inside your own inner circle planned it. Steve Smart sat rigid in the rickety chair inside that small apartment, his soaked suit now draped across the backrest, steam rising from it as it slowly dried. A blanket clung to his shoulders. His eyes were locked on the worn wooden floor, but his mind was a battlefield. The betrayal had always felt personal, but he had buried that suspicion under logic. He told himself the crash was just business, market shifts, economic timing, a bad quarter. It was easier to believe in chaos than to admit someone chose to destroy him. But now, hearing it from the lips of a man who had nothing to gain, a man whose life Steve's empire once helped dismantle, it all began to line up. The delayed approvals, the missing wire transfers, the random audits, the media leaks that appeared too fast to be organic. Steve clenched his fists, knuckles white. He whispered to himself, voice low, sharp. Who could have done it? Mandy and her father exchanged glances, both uncertain how to answer. The only sound came from the leaky radiator in the corner, clicking faintly like an old clock. Finally, Mandy spoke. You said someone inside your own circle. That means someone close to you, right? Steve nodded slowly. Closer than family. Mandy tilted her head. Then start there. He looked up at her, eyes hollow. You don't understand. I trusted everyone around me because they had to be trustworthy. The systems I built were too secure. No one could just break in. They had to know my rhythms. My calendar. My digital footprint. Mandy's father leaned back, folding his arms. Then maybe you weren't betrayed by a hacker, son. Maybe you were betrayed by an assistant, a board member, someone who knew when you stopped watching. That cut deep. Steve exhaled sharply. You mean someone who looked me in the eye every day. The older man's expression hardened. People who eat from the table are always the first to stab you in the back when the meal ends. Steve's head fell into his hands. His pulse raced. Flashes of faces spinning in his memory. His CFO, his legal advisor, his personal assistant of 10 years, the COO who hugged him at the last board meeting. Any one of them could have. Stop, Mandy said softly. Her voice cut through the spiral of paranoia like a thread of calm. He looked up. She was kneeling across from him, her face gentle but focused. If you're going to find the truth, you can't just start guessing names. You'll drive yourself crazy. Steve stared at her. This girl had saved his life less than 12 hours ago, and something in her tone made him listen. What do you suggest? Mandy's lips parted as if she wasn't sure if she should say what she was thinking. But then she did. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, something that might sound crazy. Steve frowned. What is it? She hesitated again. Her father shifted uncomfortably, watching her. Mandy sighed. You know how I told you I clean offices at night? He nodded. Well, one of the buildings I clean is in the financial district. A tall one, glass and steel, belongs to a consulting firm that handles internal audits for major corporations. Steve's attention sharpened. Which firm? She bit her lip. It's called Grant and Rowe Analytics. Steve froze. His entire body went still. His voice dropped. Grant and Rowe was one of the firms that reviewed my company's offshore ledgers 2 months before the collapse. Mandy blinked. I didn't know that. He leaned forward, urgency returning to his tone. You said you clean their offices. What do you do exactly? I vacuum. Empty bins. Wipe desks. Refill paper. Nothing special. Nothing special? He almost laughed, but not out of humor. His mind raced. Those desks hold data reports, secure files, confidential client memos. You've seen things they don't want anyone to see. Her eyes widened. I don't read them. I just clean. Did you ever notice anything unusual? He pressed. Folders. Names. Maybe mine. Mandy frowned, trying to remember. Actually, she trailed off. Steve's heart pounded. What? Last week, I was cleaning their archive floor, she said slowly. There was a stack of old printouts in a recycling bin. Most were shredded, but some pages weren't. I remember one of them had the initials, SS Holdings at the top. I didn't think much of it. Steve's pulse kicked harder. That's my holding company. Smart Systems Holdings. Mandy's brow furrowed. It also had a label on the footer. Something like confidential, Phase 2 authorization. I just assumed it was boring paperwork. He stood abruptly, pacing, hands on his head. Phase 2, Mandy looked startled. Do you know what that means? He turned toward her, eyes blazing with sudden clarity. Yes, it's code I use internally. Every acquisition or merger my company was tagged with a phase. Phase 1 meant negotiation. Phase 2 meant internal restructuring. If there was a Phase 2 authorization under my company name, and I didn't sign it, then someone was forging approvals for transactions under my ID. Mandy's father stood slowly. You mean they were staging your downfall? Exactly, Steve said. His mind was racing now, connecting dots, remembering digital alerts that suddenly went missing, encrypted messages that didn't match his own logs. They used my authority to greenlight movements of capital that looked legitimate, but were actually setting me up for collapse. It was never a coincidence. It was orchestrated. Mandy stared at him, stunned. You think those papers I saw? They might be proof, Steve interrupted. If those documents still exist, they could expose the entire conspiracy. That's what your father meant. Someone planted this years ago. Mandy's heartbeat quickened. But those papers, I threw them in the janitor's bin. The next morning, the building's waste service collected everything. Steve sank back into the chair, defeated again. So it's gone. She hesitated, glancing toward her small canvas backpack in the corner of the room. Well, she began carefully. Not all of it. Steve's head snapped up. What do you mean? I kept one page, she admitted. I don't know why, maybe instinct. It looked strange. It had your name, but it wasn't signed by you. The signature didn't match the one I saw online when I Googled you before tonight. Steve stared at her in disbelief. You have it? I think so, she said, moving toward her bag. It's in there somewhere. I folded it into my notebook. His breath quickened as she unzipped it. She pulled out a small blue spiral-bound notebook, the kind that cost $1 at the corner store. Carefully, she removed a single wrinkled page tucked inside. The paper was crumpled, faintly stained with cleaning solution, but the header was clear. Smart Systems Holdings, Ltd. Phase 2 authorization. Internal use only. Steve reached for it, hands trembling. His eyes scanned the text, immediately recognizing internal codes only he and his top executives would know. This, he whispered, this is real. This is my company's internal clearance language. But the signature, he stared harder. It's forged. He looked up at her, disbelief turning into awe. Mandy, you don't realize what you've been holding. She frowned. What does it mean? It means, he said slowly, you're holding the first real evidence that proves I was sabotaged. That everything I lost was an accident. Mandy stared at the paper, her throat dry. So someone actually tried to destroy you? Yes, Steve whispered. And they succeeded until now. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside had stopped completely, leaving only the soft hum of the city to the cracked window. Mandy looked down at the document again, her hand shaking slightly as if she held a live weapon instead of paper. Then she looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was a quiet fire in them now, the same fire that pulled him out of the ocean. Steve, she said softly. He leaned forward. Yes. She took a slow breath and whispered, what if I've been holding something that could save you without even knowing it? Steve froze. His entire life, every loss, every humiliation, every sleepless night, might all trace back to the single piece of paper a poor girl accidentally saved from a trash bin. Fate hadn't just spared his life that night. It had handed him proof. The next morning, sunlight cut through the cracks of Mandy's small window, slipping in like thin, hesitant gold. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like wet iron and asphalt. Steve sat by the window, dressed in one of her father's old shirts, 2 sizes too big. His head bowed over the creased document Mandy had rescued from the trash. He hadn't slept. The words on the page haunted him. Each line of corporate jargon felt like a knife twisted between the ribs of his past life. Phase 2 authorization. Transfer liquidity holdings. Signed not by him, but by someone who had known exactly how to mimic his hand, his codes, his tone. That kind of forgery required insider access. Not just any employee, but someone with proximity. Someone who'd had dinner with him, shaken his hand, toasted champagne at board meetings. Steve clenched his jaw. The coffee cup beside him had gone cold, untouched. Mandy emerged quietly from the small bedroom, rubbing her eyes. She was wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied up messily, a few loose curls framing her face. You didn't sleep, she said softly. He shook his head. I've spent my whole career trusting people who smiled while they sharpened knives behind my back. She crossed the room and sat beside him, looking down at the document. So what now? He turned toward her. We go get the rest of it. She blinked. The rest? The audit firm you work at, Grant and Rowe. That paper didn't appear by accident. If they handled internal audits for my company, then there are more records, digital copies, internal backups, confidential emails. We need them. Her eyes widened. Steve, those offices are secure. I'm a cleaner, not a hacker. You don't need to hack, he said. You already have something more powerful, access. Mandy hesitated, glancing at her father, who was still asleep in the recliner. If we get caught, I'll take the fall, Steve interrupted. You'll be protected. She frowned. You've already lost everything. Why risk what's left? He turned toward her fully now. Because if we don't stop them, they'll keep doing it. To someone else. To more families like yours. That hit her heart harder than he realized. She nodded slowly. Okay, then we do it together. By nightfall, the plan was in motion. Mandy's janitorial ID badge would give them entry into the lower floors of Grant and Row after hours. Security during cleaning shifts was light, a single guard making rounds every 30 minutes. The building's cameras rotated on a 5-minute cycle. Steve borrowed one of Mandy's oversized cleaning uniforms, its blue fabric and white name patch barely containing the posture of a man who once wore Armani. But for the first time, he didn't care about the irony. They entered the financial district around 10:45 p.m. The glass tower loomed over them, silent, predatory, its mirrored windows reflecting the city lights like watchful eyes. Mandy swiped her badge, and the access light turned green with a soft click. Still works, she whispered. They stepped into the lobby, the faint scent of disinfectant mixing with polished marble. The only sound was a hum of air conditioning and distant traffic. Where's the archive? Steve asked. Basement level. Mandy said, storage room 3C. That's where they keep old audit records. They moved quickly down the corridor, heads low. The cleaning trolley squeaked faintly, filled with sprays and rags, camouflage for their real mission. At the elevator, Steve pressed the B button. His reflection in the mirrored panel stared back at him. A man stripped of everything except purpose. The doors slid open. The basement was colder, dimmer. The air carried a faint metallic tang of paper and server heat. Rows of labeled cabinets stretched across a long concrete room, like silent witnesses, each drawer stamped with years and client codes. Mandy moved first, scanning the labels. Grant and Row, Internal Review, 2018, 2019, 2022, Steve said. That's when the fraud began. They reached the row marked S Holdings, 2022. Mandy tugged the drawer open. It stuck halfway, swollen with overstuffed folders. She yanked harder. The metal screeched. Inside, hundreds of documents, thick binders, printed ledgers, transaction approvals. Steve began flipping through them. These look legitimate, until you see the signatures. He froze mid-page. There. Mandy leaned over his shoulder. The signature line was labeled CEO authorization. S. Smart. The handwriting mimicked his perfectly, but one small detail betrayed it. The loop on the S was closed. His had always been open. Forgery, he whispered. Every one of these. They scanned through more pages, their breath quickening as the pattern emerged. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of fake authorizations, all approving fund transfers to shell accounts. Mandy frowned. These accounts, Delvin Group, Orbis Trust, Blue Crest Equity. Steve's face went pale. Those aren't random. Those are holding fronts, owned by my own executives. Mandy stared. You mean? My CFO, Richard Lane, Steve said bitterly. And the others, Patel, Vaughn, and Kendra James. My board. They built ghost subsidiaries under my company's name and bled me dry from the inside. Every loss, the press reported, was money siphoned into their fake accounts. He slammed a fist against the cabinet, the metal ringing like a bell. I gave them everything. Loyalty, power, and they gutted me for profit. Mandy watched him silently, her chest tightening. She saw it then, the man behind the empire, stripped bare of arrogance, confronting the truth that his fall wasn't fate. It was design. What do we do? She whispered. We document everything, Steve said, pulling out his phone and snapping pictures. Every forged signature, every fake account. This isn't just evidence, this is war. For the next 20 minutes, they moved fast, gathering proof. Mandy stacked the folders, checking for names. Steve filled his phone storage with images, the weight of every shutter click echoing through his heart. But just as they reached the end of the drawer, something caught Mandy's eye, a smaller envelope tucked beneath the folders. No label, just a wax seal marked with an unfamiliar symbol. She pulled it out carefully. What's this? Steve frowned, tearing it open. Inside were 3 glossy photographs. Each one showed him. One at a charity gala, one entering a private bank in London, one sitting in a boardroom with his CFO. But what chilled him most was the handwritten note beneath the photos. Controlled demolition. Target successfully destabilized. Mandy's hands shook. What does that mean? It means, Steve said slowly, this wasn't just about money. This was personal. Someone didn't want my company. They wanted me erased. Mandy looked around nervously. We should go. Now. Steve nodded. They gathered the documents into Mandy's cleaning cart. Disguised in the folders under rags and detergent bottles, they made their way back toward the elevator, each second stretching longer than the last. Halfway through the lobby, the elevator doors dinged open. The night guard stepped out, a tall man with a flashlight. Mandy froze. Hey, the guard called. You two aren't scheduled tonight. Her throat went dry. New shift rotation, she said quickly, forcing a nervous smile. Janitorial supervisor said we're covering for the weekend staff. The guard narrowed his eyes. Didn't hear about that. Steve stayed silent, head down, pretending to mop. The guard stared for another second, then shrugged. Whatever. Just don't mess up the glass floors again. He turned away, walking down the corridor. Only when the elevator doors closed behind them did Mandy exhale. Her pulse was hammering when they reached the outside alley, the cold air hitting them like a slap. They hurried toward her car, tossing the cleaning cart in the trunk. Steve's phone buzzed with new messages, but he ignored them. He only wanted distance from that building, from the ghost that still lived in his empire's ruins. They drove in silence, the city's lights streaking by like falling stars. Then, another vibration. But this time it wasn't his phone. It was Mandy's. She reached for it automatically, glancing at the screen, then froze. Her expression drained of color. Steve noticed immediately. What is it? She didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed locked on the text glowing across her screen. A message from an unknown number. It read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Mandy's hand trembled as she showed him the screen. Steve's blood went cold. The car's headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, but the air felt darker now, heavier, electric with unseen eyes watching them. Somewhere out there, the people who destroyed him knew he was alive. And now, they knew he wasn't alone. The message stayed on the screen, pulsing faintly in the dark, a silent declaration that the real war had just begun. They didn't speak for almost 10 full minutes after that message hit Mandy's phone. The car rolled slowly through the quieter side of the city, passing closed food stalls, flickering street lamps, silent storefronts. Mandy gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles white, eyes locked on the road ahead. Steve stared out the passenger window, jaw clenched, the threat replaying in his mind again and again. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. It wasn't a warning. It was an order. And worse, it didn't sound like panic from a panic criminal. It sounded like confidence. Someone powerful had written that. Someone certain they could shut Steve down before he ever resurfaced from ruin. Steve exhaled slowly. Mandy glanced sideways. You okay? He didn't answer. Instead, he said quietly, You didn't sign up for this. I dragged you into something dangerous. You didn't drag me anywhere, she replied. Fate did. Steve let out a breathy laugh, not mocking, but stunned by her clarity. He turned to face her fully. Mandy, he said slowly, I need to say this. And I need you to listen, because I don't want what happens next to pull you down with me. She slowed the car as they stopped at a red light. The city glowed wet and silver around them. Steve reached into his pocket. It was a black card, one of his final remaining assets, a luxury account reserved for emergency liquidation, his version of financial last breath. He slid it across the console toward her. Mandy frowned. What's that for? Protection, he said. You're on their radar now. You didn't just help me. You became a liability to the people who destroyed me. They won't ignore you. She didn't touch the card. Steve pushed it closer. There's enough on that account to relocate you if things go bad. Enough to keep your father safe, even if they target you. Take it, please. Her voice came out quiet, but without hesitation. No. He blinked. No. She looked him straight in the eyes, and what he saw there wasn't fear. It wasn't greed. It wasn't naive sympathy. It was conviction. I didn't pull you out of the ocean so you could buy me safety, she said softly. I didn't save you for reward. I save you because I believe every life has meaning. The words hit Steve like a physical force, because he couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him like that, without agenda, without fear, without trying to extract something out of him. He stared at her, the poor girl from Forgotten District, and realized something horrifyingly profound. She had more value inside her than every billionaire who had ever shaken his hand. I don't want your money, Mandy continued. I don't need your money. I need you to fight. He swallowed. Why? Because, she whispered, if you disappear now, if you let them win, then everything they've done becomes justified. You become another ghost, and the world keeps believing money is power. But I'm standing next to proof that life itself is the real power. Her voice cracked. I saved you because you mattered, not because you were rich. Steve stared at her, speechless, his soul rattled. He didn't know how to handle this feeling, this strange, painful, beautiful sensation that someone saw him as a man, not a bank account. The car continued rolling through the sleeping city. Finally, he whispered, What exactly do you think I should do? Mandy locked eyes with him. You fight back. Not secretly, not in the shadows, not quietly. You make them face their crime in daylight. Steve leaned back in the seat, stunned by her clarity. You want to go public? Yes, she said without blinking. Expose them where their power is most fragile, in front of the world they try to fool. He ran his hand slowly across his face. Going public meant stepping into fire. It meant war with people who owned lawyers, media, courts, and influence. People who could bury him forever if he misstepped. But for the first time, he didn't feel afraid of losing, because he'd already lost everything once. And somehow, he had survived that loss. Mandy placed the car in park outside her building. She turned toward him again, softer now. You think money is safety, she whispered. But money is just a tool. Character is what survives when money dies. Steve inhaled deeply. Then slowly, purposely, he slid the black card back into his pocket. You're right, he said. Shock washed through Mandy. She wasn't used to wealthy men saying those words. But tonight wasn't about wealth. Tonight was about resurrection. I won't run anymore, Steve said, voice steady now. I won't hide. I won't bury myself inside shame. They wanted to erase me, but I'm not done yet. Mandy's lips parted, hope flickering in her eyes. I'm taking this to the world, Steve continued. Press, courts, regulators, all of them. I will expose every forged signature, every stolen fund, every staged leak. He turned toward her, his voice sharper, stronger, reborn. I'm going to make them regret ever thinking I could be eliminated. Mandy nodded, slow, proud, calm. Something had shifted in him, something irreversible. The man who had walked into the ocean ready to surrender was gone. The man sitting beside her now was ready to fight. Not for wealth, not for pride, but for truth. For the first time since the collapse, Steve felt like he had purpose again, not as a billionaire, but as a human being. Mandy opened the car door, stepping out into the cool night air. Steve stepped out beside her. The streetlight above them flickered once, like the universe blinking awake. She looked at him one last time before heading inside. Then let's begin. Steve exhaled, breath turning into steam. Yes, he whispered. Tomorrow I go to war. If you're still reading this part, I want to hear from you. Do you think Steve is strong enough to face his enemies publicly? Comment where you're watching from plus your time zone. And if this story has you hooked, subscribe right now, because the fight is just about to begin. Every war has a moment, a turning point, a breath in time where the hunted ceases to run, and finally begins to hunt. For Steve Smart, that moment arrived 47 hours after Mandy dragged him out of the ocean. Not in boardrooms, not in secret, not with lawyers whispering in closed doors. No, his return began in front of the entire world. Corporate headquarters, downtown, 9:06 a.m. Every major network carried the same breaking banner. Steve Smart, live. Journalists flooded the marble lobby like a swarm of hungry insects. Lights, microphones, cameras. The same tools they once used to humiliate him now stood waiting again. But this time, Steve was not the broken man walking toward the pier. This time he was walking back into the world like a king returning to reclaim his throne. Dark tailored suit, hair slicked back, eyes sharpened into steel. And standing 15 feet behind him, unseen by most, was Mandy Holan, wearing a simple gray blouse. Quiet, small, steady. But she wasn't just present. She was the center of gravity he moved from. The press didn't know yet that she was the spine holding this resurrection upright. They would. Soon, Steve stepped up to the podium. The room instantly fell still. Cameras burned. Recorders clicked alive. All of the world's vultures were ready to watch him bleed again. He lifted the microphone and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth, strong, terrifyingly controlled. "Thank you for coming. I know many of you expected this to be a resignation, a surrender, or burial." A ripple ran through the crowd. Steve leaned forward, eyes cutting like blades. "But today, you will witness something else." He lifted a black binder, the documents Mandy helped uncover, the internal files that were never meant to see daylight, the proof of the sabotage. "These," he continued, "are the signatures, transfers, forged approvals, private communications, and backdoor payments from the people who orchestrated the collapse of Smart Global Holdings." Gasps. Cameras zoomed in. One reporter shouted, "Are you accusing your own board?" "No," Steve replied without flinching. "I am proving it." He opened the binder, turned it toward the screens, and placed every signature under the lens. The CFO, the chairman, 3 senior board members, 2 external brokers. Every name printed there was a titan of the financial world, a myth of integrity, a myth about to be burned alive. Reporters erupted, shouting questions. Steve lifted one finger. Silence in the room again. "I know exactly when these men decided to kill my empire," he said quietly. But what they didn't know was that someone who saw them, someone who paid attention, someone the world ignored, held pieces they never imagined could resurface. He paused, jaw set. The next words would reshape everything. Those responsible would be charged with corporate sabotage, securities fraud, conspiracy, and financial terrorism. The room exploded. It took 12 minutes for Wall Street to react. Stock tickers flipped red to green, then to gold, then to panic. Smart Global wasn't a corpse anymore. It was rising, and the world was panicking. Because when a lion returns, he doesn't return quietly. But there was still one more shock. Reporters demanded to know how Steve obtained certain documents, specifically the warehouse building, the one with the cleaning records, the ones Mandy had recovered. Mr. Smart, who provided these files? Steve didn't answer immediately. He looked over his shoulder. His eyes found Mandy, the girl nobody noticed, the girl who saved his life, the girl who did not chase money. He gestured toward her with a single slow motion. Her. The entire room turned. Mandy froze, breath stuck, eyes widening. Reporters stared at her like she was a glitch in reality. Steve stepped aside, giving her room. "This woman," Steve said, voice low, reverent, "saw what no one else saw. She risked everything. For truth, she is the reason I'm standing here today. Without her, the world would still believe I failed." He looked her directly in the eyes. "Her name is Mandy Holan." Mandy swallowed, heart pounding. The cameras flashed, the world staring. The poor girl from the forgotten district suddenly became the epicenter of global redemption, because this was a plot twist destiny had been holding in silence. Mandy wasn't an accident. She was a missing factor fate had been waiting to use. Steve stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough to show alignment. "She isn't an employee," Steve announced. "She isn't a footnote. She is the reason justice returned." A hush fell, like history paused. Then Steve lifted the microphone again. Final blow. Mandy, I want you beside me, not behind me, not hidden, not forgotten. Will you stand with me as I rebuild, not the old empire, but a new one? The room turned electric. Reporters were silent. Even air itself held its breath. This wasn't a business statement. This was legacy rewriting itself in real time. Mandy didn't speak yet, but tears rimmed her eyes. Because this wasn't money. This wasn't reward. This was recognition. The thing she never received from anyone. Steve extended his hand. Not a romantic gesture, but a symbolic coronation. The CEO who once valued only wealth now offered position to someone who valued humanity. A new power circle, built not on greed, but meaning. Mandy slowly placed her hand into his. And the media lost control. Everyone screaming, cameras firing, history exploding. As Steve announced, "We rebuild from here." If you're still watching at this point, then you are truly invested. So answer this. Do you believe the world needs more stories where power belongs to people with heart, not to people with money? Yes or a no? Comment your answer and tell me your location plus time zone. And if this story has your full attention, subscribe right now. There's a difference between rebuilding to prove people wrong and rebuilding because you have finally discovered who you truly are. Steve Smart has spent a lifetime equating validation with valuation. He believed balance sheets were identity. He believed wealth was worth. He believed dominance was destiny. But now, every morning he woke up, something inside him had shifted. It started quietly, not with money, not with power, not with victories. It began with Mandy Holan sitting across from him during meetings, silently watching not the numbers, but the intent behind every decision. And every time Steve drifted into his old habits, the habits that once built a ruthless empire, Mandy would tilt her head slightly. No dramatic speeches, no direct lecture, just that one tiny gesture, a reminder. We don't measure life the way you used to. In those early weeks of rebuilding, Steve built a very different kind of empire. Not an empire of intimidation, not an empire of fear, not an empire that punished weakness. He built an empire that required one currency above all, integrity. It shocked everyone. Auditors, consultants, investors, they were confused, uncomfortable. Many even walked away because they didn't know how to operate in a space where you couldn't buy your way through the door. Steve replaced his board with people who had track records of long-term consistency, not flashy quarterly results. He fired 6 executives for unethical procurement. He rejected 2 multi-billion-dollar deals because the source country was tied to human exploitation. He shut down 3 offshore channels because they bypassed regulatory visibility, something he once used to pride himself on. Money could always return, but the moral skeleton of the system, when broken, rarely does. Mandy watched him struggle through this shift. She didn't celebrate too quickly. Changing a system wasn't the same as changing a soul. Mandy wasn't naive. She saw the tension in him. She saw the nights he stayed late, hands on his head in the boardroom, breathing hard, sometimes whispering, "If I just bend one rule, I could recover faster." She heard the old billionaire instinct screaming inside him, seducing him. It doesn't matter how you win, as long as you win. But Mandy wasn't his cheerleader. She was his compass. She didn't lecture. She didn't argue. She didn't moralize. She simply reminded him, with 3 quiet words, spoken every time he looked tempted. Remember the water. Those 3 words pierced Steve harder than any threat. Because the night he stepped into the ocean, he wasn't trying to die because he lost money. He was trying to die because he lost identity. The ocean was the graveyard of ego, and ego was what used to pilot Steve's every decision. So now, anytime he felt himself drifting back into that ego, Mandy's voice echoed through him like a lighthouse cutting through black fog. Remember the water. Remember who you almost became. Remember who saved you. Remember why you're alive. The new empire was not built from the ashes of the old one, but from a brand new foundation. He named the new holding company Reveneur Global. Reveneur, French for to return. Not return to wealth, but return to humanity. His internal motto, written on the main glass wall, wasn't an ROI quote. It wasn't profit data. It was a single sentence Mandy once spoke in the cargo shack that night. Pain doesn't make you disposable. Everyone who walked into that building, from analysts to executives, saw those words before they saw any number on any spreadsheet. Steve wanted them to understand. Humans first. Systems second. Money always third. The world took notice again. But this time, not because he was ruthless. Because he was unpredictable. The corporate world didn't know how to classify him anymore. Because ruthless billionaires they understood. Charity-performing billionaires they also understood. Those ones usually were fake. But a billionaire who chose ethics before profit, that terrified them. Because systems of power do not fear good men. They fear men who evolve. Steve Smart had evolved. And Mandy, she didn't chase spotlight. She didn't want a title. But Steve didn't let her hide. He gave her the title. Director of Internal Ethos. Some laughed at that title, mocked it online. But he didn't care. Because money needed filters. Power needed accountability. And Mandy was the only checkpoint he trusted between intention and outcome. She wasn't there to be fancy. She was there to stop him from becoming who he once was. She was a moral firewall. One night, months later, after another exhausting 17-hour day, the two of them stood on the rooftop of the Revener Global headquarters. The city glowed below them. The wind pressed against their coats. The same skyline he once ruled now watched him in silence. Steve leaned on the railing, eyes soft, heavy, not with ego, but gratitude. You know, he said quietly, most people think you saved my life because you dragged me out of the water. Mandy smirked, hands in her pockets. You think differently? Steve turned to face her. Fully, humanly, without the armor of billionaire identity. Mandy, that night, you didn't just save my body. You reached into the part of me that had already died. His voice trembled, raw. All the money I ever made, all the power I ever held, all of it made me believe that only profit could validate me. He exhaled, a long breaking exhale, like he was releasing decades of silent imprisonment. But you showed me something terrifying. Mandy raised her eyes to him, waiting. Steve swallowed. You showed me I still had value without a fortune. A tear rolled down his cheek, silent, unfiltered. He didn't wipe it off. He let it fall. You didn't save my money, he whispered, voice shaking. You saved me. And in that moment, the highest climax wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was honest. Because the richest man alive finally admitted that the one thing he had never been able to afford was being human. If you're still here, you're not just watching a story. You're feeling it. So answer this in the comments. Right now, do you believe that the world would be different if the powerful were guided by people with heart instead of people with greed? Yes or no? Tell me your answer. And also, type your country plus the time where you're watching from. Because if you want, we will show something the world never expected. And if this story has you locked in fully, subscribe now. Because the ending is about to change everything. The ocean never forgets. It remembers every secret it swallows, every tear that falls into it, every moment someone walks to the edge, wondering if they matter. It remembered Steve Smart. And now, months later, Steve returned to the same pier where he once surrendered to hopelessness. But this time, he wasn't alone. The sky wasn't screaming with thunder anymore. No lightning, no rain, no chaos. Instead, soft evening sunlight kissed the horizon, turning the water into liquid gold. The wind was gentle, not violent. The air smelled like salt and new beginnings, not like the bitterness of despair. Steve stood where he had once stood with death breathing down his neck. But this time, Mandy Holan stood beside him. She wore a simple, oversized cardigan, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied up, hands resting in her pockets. She didn't dress up for this moment, because authenticity doesn't require costume. Steve, now dressed not in an expensive suit, but plain black sweater and comfortable shoes, stared at the peaceful water. For a long moment, he didn't say a word. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. Then, quietly, almost like speaking to the ocean itself, Steve whispered, I almost died here, Mandy didn't rush to comfort him. She just let silence breathe. Then, softly, she replied, "No, you didn't almost die. Your ego did." Steve blinked. That sentence, one sentence, hit deeper than any therapy session, deeper than any financial loss. Because she was right. He didn't try to end his life because he lost his empire. He tried to end his life because he didn't know who he was without it. He mistook money for soul, power for identity, growth for self-worth. Wealth had been his mirror, and when it shattered, he thought he shattered. Mandy stepped closer to the edge, gazing at the calm water, the same water that once tried to drag Steve under. "You didn't lose everything," she said softly. "You lost what blinded you." Steve inhaled, slow, heavy, chest expanding like a burden was lifting. Finally, "You're right," he whispered. "I thought money made me relevant. But now, I understand something terrifying." Mandy turned her face towards him, waiting. Steve's voice cracked, not with weakness, but with clarity. Power was never wealth. He paused, like his soul needed to complete the sentence on its own timeline. Power was heart. Mandy looked at him with a gentle expression, one not of pity, but respect, because this was the moment. This was the true climax. Not the rescue, not the evidence, not the revenge. This quiet understanding. At the exact location where he once surrendered himself to the ocean, this was the moment Steve Smart finally became alive. Not rich, not famous, alive. And in that silence, the entire journey made sense. The universe didn't send him a billionaire to restore him. It sent him someone who had nothing, but who carried what he lacked. Hope, compassion, humanity. Mandy didn't save Steve because he was a billionaire. She saved him because he was a human being drowning in a world that rewards ego and punishes vulnerability. That night, standing on the pier, Steve didn't feel like a king trying to regain his throne. He felt like a man finally understanding the purpose of living. The sun slowly dipped lower, turning the horizon into a blend of copper and violet. Mandy crossed her arms gently, still watching the water. "So," she asked with a small smile, "do you still think you lost everything?" Steve shook his head. "No, I didn't lose everything. I lost the illusion of everything." Mandy smiled, because his answer meant the transformation was complete. It wasn't words on paper. It wasn't speeches in boardrooms. It wasn't dramatic gestures. It was his heart. The shift was internal, irreversible. Steve Smart, the man who once believed wealth was his soul, now understood wealth was just a tool, not a definition. He understood that night, on the pier, that Mandy didn't just save his life. She saved his meaning. And the ocean, for the first time, felt like a witness to rebirth instead of a witness to surrender. Steve exhaled, a soft, peaceful exhale, like releasing the last fragments of his old self. "Thank you," he whispered. Mandy didn't respond. She didn't need to. Some truths don't require dialogue. They just require presence. Steve took one last look over the water, then stepped back from the edge. This time, stepping backward, not forward. A step of life, a step of return. They walked away from the ocean, not with trauma, but with clarity. Two souls who weren't bound by wealth or circumstance, but by the quiet, unexplainable thread of fate. If you're still here, that means this story reached something inside you. So before scrolling, I want two things from you. Comment your country plus the exact time right now. I want to see how far around the world this moment traveled. And if you want this to continue into a new chapter, if you want this to evolve into a part 2, maybe romance, maybe destiny, maybe something even bigger than this, subscribe immediately. That tiny click might be the fuel that bursts the next story.